Let's continue the conversation around the arrest of the Gupta brothers, Rajesh and Atul Gupta, key figures in South Africa's state capture project. They've been arrested in Dubai. This comes after a red Interpol notice which was issued for the brothers who were wanted on charges of fraud and money laundering. Now, the Department of Justice saying discussions between various law enforcement agencies in the UAE and South Africa on the matter are ongoing. Well, let's get analysis now. Joining us is legal expert Dr. Llewelyn Curlewis, who speaks to us via the virtual platform. Doc, good morning to you. Thank you once again for availing yourself for these discussions. And you know, as I always do with you, trying to break down the legal process in the most simplest language we could possibly use. Just how intricate or complicated a process of extraditing the Gupta brothers to South Africa might be. We already have that reference case of Shrien Diwane some years ago, who allegedly brought his wife to South Africa in order for her to be murdered.
Thank you and good morning to everybody listening. Yes, indeed, nothing is easy when it comes to extradition, and especially in the criminal law and procedure. You must remember that we've got two different countries involved here, and first and foremost, there are certain processes that must be finalized in Dubai before they can actually be extradited to South Africa to start the processes over here. As it currently seems to me, and we have no definite information in that regard, they have been arrested, but on what charges and exactly by whom, we do not necessarily know. We assume it is as a result of the red warning that was issued by Interpol more or less 4 months ago. But regardless of the reason for their arrest, they will probably, first of all, apply for bail in their local courts. And after that, and despite and regardless of the outcome, they will then in any event fight the arrest and the legalities of such an arrest in order to try and persuade the courts in Dubai not to proceed with the extradition. On the best scenario for South Africa, and that's on the assumption that they fail all these attempts not to be extradited from the UAE, they will then be accompanied to South Africa, and once they land on OR Tambo, they will be taken into custody by the South African police services, and then they will appear for their first appearance in a South African court, probably a magistrate's court, either Johannesburg Magistrates Court or maybe Kempton Park, after which the matter will then be postponed for further investigation, and then to set a trial date in the High Court in Gauteng for charges relating to fraud, corruption, money laundering, and so on. This time around, they will not be eligible for bail in South Africa because obviously they are a flight risk, and we will not entertain that bail application on par with what they are currently trying to pursue in Dubai.
Well, Doc, you've just touched on a point that I suspect we South Africans will worry about, and that is the fact that they are a flight risk. You mentioned that in Dubai, there are these reports that they are applying for bail, having spent their weekend in jail. Who's to say that they will not be a flight risk where they are right now, that jurisdiction of the UAE?
Well, you are spot on in that comment. We don't know what evidence they will provide to their courts in order to persuade them to be successful on a bail application. Remember, we must compare apples with apples, and the South African law and procedure regarding bail is totally different from that in the UAE. So it's not as if we can say, but listen, the same arguments and kind of evidence that we will typically provide in a South African court to oppose bail will be allowed and is relevant in the courts in the UAE. But on the best scenario, we must obviously put it out there to say, but listen, the mere fact that Interpol is involved must surely count for something and persuade the prosecuting authority in the UAE that they should guard against easily granting bail for the Guptas. Because remember, they can afford bail. So it's not a question of affordability. It's a question of whether they will be standing their trial ultimately, because that is the purpose of bail, to ensure that you stand your trial ultimately.
Yeah. Doc, on the face of it, it would appear that the authorities in the UAE are cooperating with their South African counterparts. What could be the basis for them refusing to give us, the Guptas, to come and face trial here?
Yeah, I do agree. On face value, it seems as if they are cooperative, and I think that's a good point of departure from their side, because from an international perspective, it will create a perception of international relations that are important for purposes of international trade, industry, etc. But one must remember that if you are a citizen of a specific country, and remember they have passports that is either Indian of origin, alternatively from the UAE, maybe on both sides, I don't know. But the fact of the matter is there is also an obligation on a country to protect its citizens. And if you are a citizen or legally in the country on whatever basis, there is obviously from a humanitarian point of view and also international law point of view an obligation on a country's courts to protect the integrity of their citizens, which includes not to extradite any person for flimsy reasons. The fact of the matter is this is not a flimsy reason. They are sought everywhere in the world, predominantly in the United States as well as in South Africa, and I am sure that the pressure from both these countries will be sufficient maybe to persuade the UAE to then ultimately proceed with the extradition of the two Gupta brothers. But that is a protracted phase and process that will take place. And make no mistake, that is only the part that takes place in Dubai. Once they land in South Africa, then the real process only starts. And I do foresee that this in itself will take the best part of many years to then finalize before we see them, hopefully, in quotation marks, and on the assumption they are guilty, which most of us suspect, behind bars.
Yeah. I suppose it goes without saying then, Dr. Curlewis, that for them to be brought to South Africa, the NPA, which is the country's prosecuting authority, is going to present, or is going to have to present, a very watertight and compelling case to the authorities in the UAE for why it is important for these people to come and face the crimes that they allegedly committed in South Africa.
Absolutely correct. Exactly from what I said earlier on. They must be persuaded that it's in the interest not only of justice as a whole, but also in terms of international law and relations, that it's worthwhile for them to extradite their citizens to a foreign country to stand trial for the alleged transgression. So that is correct. What is important and what we should probably also pursue is to see whether we can maybe get to a situation where some of the assets and their funds get frozen for purposes of prohibiting them from using their funds to protract the current events. Because let's just face it, if you do not have the funds to fight all these battles in all the various courts all over the world, then it makes things more difficult for you. And that is a good point of departure, because we don't like to see a situation where the illegally gained money is used to fight the very purpose which we would like to see them before court.
Yeah.
In other words, to frustrate the proceedings and the processes to get you behind bars.
And that's the last point I'm going to explore with you, the issue around monies. I think it was touched on just on the back of the Zondo Commission at the time that everybody was worried about just how much money is being poured into this commission vis-a-vis what monies are going to have to be spent by our country's law enforcement authorities to try and get these people who have taken massive amounts. They're going to, they have what is called a war chest in order for them to fight these cases. And so it goes without saying that you're quite correct in that at some point, South Africa's authorities are going to have to fight that the funds that they allegedly took from South Africa illegally are frozen so that they don't have this unending well of money. But importantly, how well resourced must South Africa's NPA be in order to see through these processes?
Well, first of all, I concur with your observation. I think that is a correct analysis of the practical situation that we find ourselves in, and especially the NPA. To answer your last mentioned question, yes, definitely they must put their best guns forward. And by guns, I mean the best prosecutors in the country must be on the forefront of proceeding with the prosecution. And if they are not equipped or maybe in a position to do so, then they must outsource senior counsel in order to assist them in the prosecution of these alleged perpetrators. That's the only way we can secure a possible conviction. Make no mistake, the last thing that we would want to see is that our own taxpayers' monies are used fruitlessly to pursue a prosecution that's going nowhere over the course of the next 10 years. Remember, we've seen in the Zuma situation that charge took the best part of 10 or 12 years to get to a stage where we are almost at the beginning of a trial. We cannot afford, from a financial point of view, from the taxpayers' money, another situation where the Guptas have a similar tendency to use the Stalingrad technique to frustrate the process, and where a lot of taxpayers' monies also get thrown into the coffers of fruitless exercises. So that is a question that the NPA must ask itself, but I think they must go in all guns blazing. They've got one opportunity to get the morale of the country where it's supposed to be. This is a good start, make no mistake. I am not only criticizing here, I'm also saying this is probably the best news we've seen in a while since the Zondo Commission's report. But that being said, it's still a long process, and I don't think we are going to see the end of this within the foreseeable future, at least not within the next couple of years.
Dr. Llewelyn Curlewis, thank you very much for explaining that to us so well. Thank you very much indeed. It's going to be a hard slog to try and get these people here.